genuinely excited about. I think the advent of AI and just the democratization of these tools that, like the creativity that you're seeing, it is kind of amazing. There, there are no safe zones, which is also kind of introducing the potential for disruption. And I think manufacturing always moves a little bit slower because in the end you're trying to remain consistent. You're trying to run a plant. But the ability to, hey, what if I had this data and that data? What if I combine these two things? Or, we have two different groups, two different areas of a plant that all of a sudden can start to talk to each other and start to do some things. I mean, it's incredible. Not only the content, but then also even the presentation around, some of the, like, the look and feel, the ability to just make it more interesting. I saw something on YouTube or on LinkedIn today. There was he had done a Star Wars, opening scene, describing something about, and it was manufacturing. And his comment was, as engineers, we don't often get to be as creative as we'd like to be, because this is, plants. Like, stuff happens that, it's serious business, but you have the ability to do stuff that's serious, but also introduce it in a way that's creative. So I think that's, is AI really taking over? No, I think there's a lot, in the real world, it's maybe moving a little bit slower. But at the same time, your ability to see innovation has really taken off. So sorry to ramble. But.
I think from my perspective, the thing that's most exciting about manufacturing is that, and then my perspective is that of being the consumer, right? So I worked in the manufacturing space for my first career, almost 34 years. And in that, the one thing that I really took from all that time in manufacturing is that he who builds last builds best. There are a lot of established businesses that do extremely well, and they do so because they're very good at what they have, but oftentimes they find themselves running into technology that puts them at a disadvantage. And I learned that on so many different occasions as I was looking for the right equipment for the right job. And so what I'm excited about is that I was in the career long enough to actually see the mass exodus of manufacturing in the United States. And I likened it to the fact that we had lazy management. We ran from things instead of making the investments and taking the time to figure out how to make it work. We took the cheap route out, which is where's the cheaper labor? And it wasn't just the manual labor that was out there, right? The folks that are working for $1 and $2 an hour. It was also the professionals, the engineers and managers and whatnot that they could pay significantly less. And so that made them more profitable as opposed to having the investments that actually made the cost of what you're paying a person irrelevant. And so now what's really exciting is there's a lot of talk about investing in the manufacturing space. And I'm eager to see how we take full advantage of the fact that there are manufacturing methods and equipment and gear. And Ryan talked about the AI portion. You start to put all those things together and suddenly you get a chance to outpace the competition at multiple levels, both on the hardware side as well as on the software/AI side. And that is what is really exciting for me and maybe gives me a little bit of pause for a guy who's probably going to be exiting this space in just a few years.
So for me, it's actually the opportunity. So one of the things that coming out of tech, I've been through mainframe to open systems to client server to cloud. I've been in all of those transitions working for vendors. And one of the key things in each of those transitions is that it actually gives access to more people, access to technology to more people. Right? So in manufacturing, the big manufacturers have always had access to technology. Right? The first time I started talking about IoT, I remember I was at a conference talking to some, he's an OT guy, and he's like, yeah, we were doing IoT before it was a thing. So, but those are big companies. They had big budgets, right? They had the people who had the expertise to go bring those in. I think the exciting thing now is that, if you look at manufacturing across the US, there's something like 285,000 manufacturers. Only about 2,000 of them have more than 1,000 employees. The vast majority, 75% of them, have less than 20. 93%, I think, have less than 100 employees. So that's the vast majority of manufacturing in the US. And now you finally have, they have access to the same technology that the big guy has as well. Right? And so, the opportunity, I think, is much bigger than it has been in the past. And it's open to a lot more companies. Right? So I think that to me is probably the most exciting thing, is the access to technology by even smaller manufacturers and mid-sized manufacturers.
Hans, taking that same thought process, talk a little bit about how you see manufacturing's ability to be able to take what would have been historical problems
Mhm.
or challenges that would have kept that away from the smaller companies, and how the technology has evolved to start to take away those roadblocks. Because I think that's an interesting piece of what you're talking about.
Yeah. So, I mean, we all use Claude, right? We've talked about this
Yeah.
a lot. I think Claude is a very good example, right? If you have you can pretty much design a whole system on its own without any experts, right? Obviously, you need to go validate it. But that's a very good example of where you have access to knowledge that you wouldn't have had, right? In the past, you'd be bringing in expensive consultants. And again, that's why, going back to the, we did IoT before it was a thing, right? There's only a certain set of companies that did IoT before it was a thing, right?
Yeah.
It's not everyone, right? And so, yeah.
Very interesting. Ryan, you've had a lot of experience over on the software side of the house, right? And so what are some of the changes that you've seen that kind of reinforce what Hans is talking about?
I think the process of evolution is really changing, and I'm not sure it's caught up yet to the technology, but your ability to iterate. We've all experienced this. Like I can do things faster than I can describe them to someone else, and I would rather almost do it myself versus share with a team. I've seen very senior executives that for the first time, in all my career, you had executives that maybe started in it at, as engineers or as, on the shop floor or whatever. But at some point you've got to let go and you've got to accept that you're going to push your process change, push your technology change through large organizations, even at small companies. The ability for you to just try something. Now, that doesn't mean that that's the way it's going to go in. It doesn't mean that that's the way it's going to perpetuate, but your ability to iterate directly or directly with your team and bring something to life, bring a vision to life, I think is fundamentally going to change everything. My wife is looking at a project management class, and even things like project management, your traditional stand-up meetings, your traditional how you manage a project, like all of that is changing, and I think it's just that much more inclusive. At the same time, your ability to get distracted, to go down rabbit holes, to explore things that you never knew about, and discover that you're now like, a mile off course and you've got to come back. Like, I think all of that is stuff that we're going to have to work through. But yeah, I think again, it's that much more accessible, and the ability to make an impact is that much stronger. And, whether you're a large company, small company, it's really fundamentally the organization that might limit your ability as opposed to, the having access to resources or otherwise. So
I have a question for you, Pat. What does iteration mean in your world in a factory? Like the type of iteration we talk about in software.
Yeah. So that's an interesting perspective, right? When we iterate on the manufacturing side, it's oftentimes making very small steps to try to make small improvements. Rarely do we actually iterate at the design level. And from my personal experience,
Interesting.
iterating at the design space is where the magic happens.
Yeah.
Because now everything is fair game, right?
Yeah.
It's not the one little thing
Yeah.
that I'm going to change.
Yeah.
I can change the rules of the game. I had an example that early in my career where the question was about how do we start to manufacture a brand new type of product
Mhm.
in a brand new market where we had 0% market share.
Mhm.
And we sat down as a group and said, okay, here's all the things that we do today. And how do we do that in a way that we can capture the market and leverage it? So both from a technology standpoint, as well as the equipment to be able to do it. And we iterated fearlessly on that process,
Oh.
brought an entirely new process to bear. And that turned into $1 billion business, and probably is one of the things that I was most proud of in my career is that we took something from zero to something that we scaled globally and became $1 billion market. Now, that was for a company that I worked for, not for me, unfortunately, right? But there's lessons in that by
Yeah.
going through that process
Yeah.
and to relentlessly just continue to iterate. Like it's never good enough. And I think the closest you get to that is when you look at sports athletes.
Yeah.
And all the great ones, they always say, I'm just working to get better. I'm working to get better. Even the GOATs would say it, right? Michael Jordan and LeBron James. And it was always about getting better. And I think oftentimes in the manufacturing space, that same attitude is not quite prevalent. And I think it should be, because that's where the fun and the magic
How will it
happens.
change? Because that's one of the problems, right? Is that when we talk about digital transformation is an overused term, but at the end of the day, you are transforming. Right? You're changing how you do things.
Yeah.
And it is a hurdle for everyone today in manufacturing, right? For many reasons. But how do you think we move past this?
Oh, I think for the first time, we actually are transforming. Like up till now, I would say we're evolving slowly.
Okay.
Like
That's a good
I think
way to look
with
at it.
with the tools that are now available is the first time you would actually say it's truly transforming,
Yeah.
or it's bringing transformation to the masses as opposed to just certain organizations.
It's democratizing it for sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I think it's also stressing the traditional organizational walls, functional walls, because why wouldn't I? Again, your design example, that's typically a whole different group in the company that don't talk to me. I'm building the product. You just make the product, right?
Right. Right.
I don't know if those walls exist the way they used to.
So double click on that. So if you think about 5 years or give me an eternity, what does a manufacturing operation look like in 2031 that would be unrecognizable as someone running a plant today?
I think that's a great question. So let me give you an aspirational view of that. And I think if we take that medium term view, I think it's probably a fair way to describe it. What I'd like to see is that we have leaders that have the courage to actually flip the pyramid upside down, and have servant leaders that are actually willing to clear out the roadblocks for the folks that are actually doing the work and actually bringing home the innovation that Ryan was talking about. Because it's hard to set ego aside and be willing to serve the people that work underneath you. You have to first recognize that those are the folks that are making the money, right? And anything you can do to help them become better is going to help make that money. So instead of worrying about what is my job title, what is, my standing within the organization, how can I help to make everybody else better? And so I think we're going to see more organizations that are willing and able to have what I'll call maybe younger leadership that's going to come in and be willing to do that, where I think as the old guy on the panel here, I think that we were less willing to do that in my generation, quite frankly, and uncomfortable. And I think that's going to change. And I think that's what it's going to look like, is much more servant leadership. At least that's my hope.
I am still at the end of the day a geek, and the technology still excites me. So to me, I mean, we're starting to see companies that are talked about earlier, that are essentially making specific equipment autonomous, bits and pieces. But you can see the next step is, okay, let's start connecting these, right? So, and the pace at which things are moving, that's pretty realistic in 5 years if you start moving in that direction, right? And figure out, but at the end of the day, I think having now been at this for 12 years in manufacturing, that's probably unrealistic. I would hope that we've enabled a lot more smaller and mid-sized manufacturers, right? Because many of these are suppliers to the big companies. And as we discovered during COVID, the OEMs didn't have visibility further than their, immediate tier one suppliers. And, we don't have enough people, right, coming in. So those are the things that we need to be solving in the next 5 years, right? Figuring out how, all of these people who are retiring, how do we capture that knowledge, right, and not lose it? I'm not sure that I don't know how we're going to increase the pipeline. Although if you look in, I was at the Oregon Manufacturing Innovation Center. There's a lot of young people that are coming in and very exciting, but it's not traditional manufacturing. Right? It's all there's a lot of additive there, but I think, yeah, I mean, we in the next 5 years we need to figure out how to enable the smaller and mid-sized manufacturers.
Yeah, I think the other question right on the back end of that, because you brought up the generational gap and kind of what's leaving. I think if we don't figure out how to take the aspects of the working world that are painful, problematic, and undesirable out of the process, I think we're going to fail in that quite miserably. But to Ryan's point, I think AI has a place at that table. I really do. I think AI is going to be the thing that takes away all that banal work that's done today and say, let me free you from that and let's go do the cool stuff, which is the innovation, right? I think that's going to be the difference maker.
Yeah.
And keep them enthusiastic.
Yeah.
I think you'll see a lot more, like right now, depending on the industry, depending on the the process type, depending on the company, like adoption of new technologies is somewhat inconsistent. And so you have some operations that are lights out, often it's new products that get introduced that require new processes, and therefore they get new investment. But in a lot of manufacturers, it's just kind of running the same thing they've always been running. But I think that there's less fear of the unknown of a lot of these technologies. They're proven. I can do condition monitoring, and that's a very accessible thing where 30 years ago that was something that only ExxonMobil or some of the bigger companies would have access to. So I think there'll be a lot more use of, and just the propagation of a lot of these technologies should be more uniform. I think there's the question of have we truly gone lights out 5 years from now? There's still a lot of plants that are nowhere near lights out, that don't have a MES, that don't have a SCADA, that don't have. So will there be more? Sure, there'll be more. Will there be adoption of things like additive manufacturing or robotics? Or yes. I'm not sure that we have that all-in mentality that some other countries have, where it's there isn't a question that there's a common view of a uniform. Robots are doing everything. People are kind of standing at the side. I think that is more common, or you see the willingness to go that far is more common elsewhere. I'm not sure it's fully accepted here.
But the thing is that we spend a lot of time talking about lights out factory, but then you go to factories, even big companies, where they literally have the schedule on the whiteboard, right? Inventory management on the whiteboard, on a clipboard, right? So they're so far from lights out.
Yep.
And sometimes I think if we talk about the lights out, that feels like I'm about to boil the ocean, so I'm not going to do anything. Yeah. So it's I think the lights out also depends on size of business, the company, right? Its sectors. But it's just the problem. I think the challenge to me with the lights out is that it makes it seem like I'm going to have to boil the ocean. And that means that I need to dedicate resources to go figure this thing out. We're already fighting fires, already doing all of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I think we need to figure out like what are the steps to get there and who actually needs it. Maybe not everybody needs it, right?
The business reasons for it. Like,
Yeah.
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 Okay. So I take out the 5 people that I already have, like as a percentage of my cost or as a percentage of how I'm going to make an impact on my business, like that
Yeah.
labor isn't necessarily the issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
the need to go
I'm glad
like
you
that.
brought that up, Ryan.
Yeah.
That's an important piece. So oftentimes, like people will misconstrue like lean manufacturing and say, "Oh, how many people can I take out? How many dollars do I save?" Right? And the truth is, lean is all about how do I actually use time as a weapon, and how do I actually produce more in less time. That doesn't necessarily mean less people, and in fact, it's by intention. It's to actually produce more. And so what ends up happening in the well-run organizations is you say, well, today we do that in 5.5 days of work, right? I'm working overtime. How do I do that in 5 days, no overtime? How do I do it in 4 days, no overtime? Never will you see somebody talk about lean and say, well, how can I just pay my people less?
Yeah.
Because the first time you do that is the last time you do it because no one's going to support it.
Yeah.
But I promise you, if you give people more of their work life back into their personal life, you've got somebody that's going to work with you. And I think that's the part where the magic starts to happen. And how do you start to make it personal so that people benefit from it?
Yeah.
Not just the company, right? Make it more holistic.
Yeah, I don't know how many companies we've walked the halls of, and I can't think of one that is after labor reduction as an objective. Like they may be dealing with labor issues as a result of the labor pool isn't there or something else, but cost reduction by taking people out is that went out back in the 90s or whenever.
And you're trying to improve at the end of the day, you're also trying to improve productivity, right? And labor is one in manufacturing. Labor is one metric from a productivity perspective, right? It's one input. You have materials, you have energy, you have capital. All of those need to be productive, and not just the labor. In IT, we justify a lot of things based on labor productivity, but here you have multiple labor issues going on between retirements, not enough people coming in. Right? That's not necessarily your biggest challenge, right? It's all the other stuff that is input.
I think your earlier point's an important one too. So, in order to avoid the boiling of the ocean portion of it, I think people have to realize that you do have to take a couple steps back to be able to get there. And it's not as daunting as it would have been in the past. I'll say pre-AI type days, right? I think if you start with a framework that says what I need to do is just think about things from having a data fabric that connects everything, right? Let me start with that. And that all these different pieces that exist that can be bolted to it and are disparate today, which makes it cumbersome and people have to manage. If I can bridge that gap with something, whatever that's going to be, I think that's what makes it all simple. So it's not like you've got to rip and replace everything that has to come out. I think it's just to have a little adjacency that allows you to say, you know what, I can still leverage AI to do a bunch of work for me. I can get these agents doing the things that people don't want to do or don't do well. And I can take that out and I can start to put that together in a way that actually gives you that work-life balance. It makes it simple. So I'm not getting the 11 o'clock calls at night or 2 in the morning, right? And just being able to allow the system to work the way it's intended to work and have workflows that execute on their own automatically.
Yeah,
I agree.
So something that dovetails really nicely into that, I'd like to get each of y'all's input is for someone that's like a client manager or someone in an executive role at a manufacturer, they're listening to this. They know they need to, get to that next level. There's some FOMO going on. They hear about all these AI improvements they could be making, but they're not making. They know they need to change something, but they don't know where to start. Where would you start right now?
I think, first of all, it's important to recognize that just having the improvement or the right answer is just a small piece of actually working that through the system and achieving the outcome. And our ability to generate the right answer is almost it's almost gotten to a level of noise where there's so many good solutions, there's so many right answers that your ability to absorb those right answers is, there's a buffer that's process related, people related. I'm too busy doing what I'm doing. So I think that I think recognizing that it's not just a solution discussion. It's a culture discussion. It's a process discussion. It's have I prepared my team for this change that is coming? I would say that I've seen some best practices that, again, every company is a little different, but I heard one not too long ago where their approach, and we're big fans of centers of excellence and kind of distributed knowledge sharing and bringing the organization up by understanding what each other's doing and then building around that, building your standards and building your templates in a way that's iterative, but is founded in the results that are being achieved in the plant floor. This one organization was using a top-down and bottom-up approach. So they had some top-down major drivers that they're trying to achieve, and that they had allocated some real dedicated attention, resources to, and otherwise, your traditional model. They had also, at the same time, instituted, they had given a shared tool set to essentially to the population. Didn't matter whether you're front desk, you're an accountant, you're an engineer, you're on the floor, and they had almost remove the need to prioritize or justify. You can experiment. You need to continue to do your work, but and it was almost more of a hacker's mindset, like just explore, just change, but they also coupled it with a rigorous communication process. So it was back to that center of excellence model where every 2 weeks got together and what's everyone doing? Where are you finding gains? Where are you finding improvements? And I thought that model was right-minded, in that it also, it properly funded some of those experiments, because one of the problems that happens is the people closest to the problem don't have the resources, don't have the funds to make stuff happen. And in that particular model, they had allocated time and budget to make stuff happen without the delay of needing to go justify and build the business case and otherwise. Like that, it was just a really interesting way of doing things.
That's like Google's, the engineers, I don't know if they sort of do 20% of your time on whatever you want to do.
Yep.
The business within a business, right?
Yeah.
I think Ryan touched on something that's really super important, and that is, in order for an organization to do what Ryan was describing, you have to have a leadership position where a person gives the people that work with them and for them the ability to fail.
Yeah.
And that sounds like a silly thing, right? But I promise you, when you encourage people to say, I expect you to fail, and when you fail, we're going to talk about, okay, why did we fail? And we're going to move right past that and talk about what did we learn?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And in that learning, that's where the magic happens, because suddenly people are no longer afraid of failing
Trying things
when they're
out.
being encouraged. That's crazy talk. Why would you do that, right? But it creates a certain type of an environment, and I've been part of that type of environment where it's hyper stimulating.
Yeah.
And you're encouraged to say, I'm going to take a chance. Why am I going to stop short? This was good. I can do way better if I can just push the envelope a little bit further. Well, sometimes you can push that envelope, and it's not going to happen, right? But at the end of the day, when you do get there, what an incredible feeling. You know, I think it all ties back to what is the type of environment that as soon as your feet hit the floor in the morning, you're like, man, I can't wait to go in and do something, right?
And dreaming about it at night,
Yeah, exactly. Solving problems at night, right? Like
waking up at 3
all the
a.m.
great ones do it. Right. And you know, I liken that to sports teams.
Yeah.
Sports teams are fearless in their pursuit of excellence.
Yeah.
And yet when you go into the manufacturing space or just business in general, I've never seen that level of commitment ever really manifest in a manufacturing space. But the places that come closest to me in my mind are actually the places that say, we're going to push the envelope and we're going to try things. And you know what? We're going to fail and it's going to be okay. We'll get through it and we'll learn and we'll do something really cool. That's the best I can say.
Yeah, I think that's important because one of the things that I didn't realize was that every factory is different, even it's pumping out the same widget. And you can't just take from one factory and go to another and say, okay, well, it worked there, right? Because that is completely against what you're describing. Right? You're saying, well, I fixed it. It's all done now. This is how we're going to do it everywhere, instead of, we're going to go there, we're going to try it out, and then we'll iterate, right? And get to whatever that particular factory needs. So, yeah, I think that's really important, given that every factory is different.
Well, there's cultural norms go along with that, right? So if you spend any time working in Japan, they are very much conformists, and whatever the best standard is, that's what they do. And I saw that, and it was inspirational in terms of the way they adopted it. Working with the folks in Germany, you can't work in Germany without talking about standards, right? I mean, everything ties back to a standard, and it's almost ingrained in who they are as people. And when you come back to the United States, you start to realize we are a bunch of cowboys. Everybody wants to do their own thing. And not that it's a bad thing, but you've got to spend your time actually documenting it so you understand what does best really look like. And if you've done that, hey, hats off to you. Let's go figure it out. But let's make sure that everybody complies with that best standard, right? It can't be everyone doing their own best standard because it'll never work. So I think that's part of that challenge of how do we go back and forth with it.
Although, and this may be just an anecdote, but I heard, I talked to an integrator in Japan who works with the big automotive companies, and one of the interesting things that he said was traditionally, the companies would push stuff out. Mothership, he's pushing stuff out. You have factories here, best practices are being developed over there, and getting pushed out. And because the pace of innovation and technology is going so fast, it's starting to reverse, where they're now interested in what the regions are doing and see what they can adopt, right? And I don't know if they're going towards cowboy, but that was, to me, was interesting, because it's like it's the technology is changing how they work as well, right? Even these big companies, right, across the globe. So yeah.
But you always want somebody that's looking at, I understand we've got a best practice, but how can the best practice be improved upon? Right? Because if you're not doing that, then you're just waiting for your competition to come in and steal your lunch.